Good afternoon, and welcome to D&I One-on-One, a biweekly webinar series where we talk about different topics related to culture, inclusivity, diversity, and belongingness. And today's conversation is being heard at work. We're going to talk about hearing loss. The learning objectives for our program today are really on workplace communication and how to support colleagues with hearing loss, but our conversation is really broader than that because hearing loss impacts all of us and impacts us all the time. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about with Pat. So my name is Jina Etienne. I am the host and the creator of this series. I'm a certified diversity executive, and my work is centered on something that I call fearless inclusion. And I define that as the freedom to be yourself and the ability to create space for others to do the same. I develop training and workshops. I facilitate conversations and programs really focused on helping my clients create cultures where there is psychological safety, people feel safe being themselves, where inclusivity is something they can demonstrate through intention, the outcome of which is belonging. And I shifted to this work about 10 years ago, and I bring my life experience to my work every day. And so speaking of life experience, joining me today is Pat Dobbs. Pat is a DEI consultant that works and helps organizations understand how hearing loss impacts communication. She supports people with hearing loss. She also supports people who are communicating with people with hearing loss. She started losing her hearing at 19, and she now wears bilateral cochlear implants. I think I said that right. And so that's what I mean by her lived experience. That informs her work. She grew up in New York City. At some point, she moved to Alaska, and then you can see her on the slide. She drove back to where is it? New Jersey, and now she lives in Maine on an island. And her fat cat, you see the fat cat there? That's Ted, and her dog is Schnook, and you just might hear Schnook today because he was like flapping his ears a little bit earlier. So Pat, thank you for joining me.
It is my pleasure. Thank you for asking me to join you.
I'm excited about today's conversation. If you have questions, please put them in the queue as we go along. I will be sharing them. We'll be answering them as we go through. Now, Pat, before we get started, what I want to do and what we thought we would do is let's start this very first polling question just to get a sense for who's out there. So Chris, if we can go ahead and launch that, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Poll number 1 is active on your screen, folks. Do you know anyone with a hearing loss or have a hearing loss? Make your selections now, folks, and this poll is active for 60 seconds.
So while this poll is, and Chris, because we're not going to do a great job for a number of reasons of tracking time today, please interject when the poll is about to close instead of being so kind as to pause until we come to a pause. Deal?
Gladly.
All right. So with that in mind, Pat, I think this is also the perfect time to say I'll make the disclaimer on your part. Pat is not a doctor. She just plays one on TV. So that means this is not medical advice you're giving us today. Is that right, Pat?
Oh, absolutely not. I'm not an audiologist. I'm not an ENT. I'm a person who has lived with hearing loss for many years through business, through life, through all sorts of, well, I mean, I've had a hearing loss since I'm 19.
So this is what we're going to hear. We're going to learn about that today. Yeah, you're going to close the poll, aren't you?
We'll close this poll down in 3, 2, and 1. Closing out poll 1 of 5, folks. Do you want me to share the results as well, Jina?
I'll share them out loud verbally. How about that?
Go right ahead.
So 53%, Pat, said they know somebody with hearing loss. 28%, it's neither. They don't know anybody and they don't have a hearing loss. 10% said both, actually. And 5% said that they have hearing loss. So
hey,
this is our audience.
Hey, so I'm not seeing your screen. I'm gonna need to give you presenter control again, it looks like. I think.
Aren't we just having fun today?
Of course.
So
let's see.
Yeah, I don't see sharing permissions again.
Let's see. You should see it now.
I do. Thank you all for being so patient with us. Hey, you know what? If you can't see the screen, you can still hear us. We're still having a conversation, right? So,
You
Pat,
know, I think this is life. It's nothing works perfectly. There are always glitches.
and it can go to, can I say HE double hockey sticks? It can go there in a flash. Okay, so before I met Pat, let me just say I really didn't know much about hearing loss, and I don't think I knew anybody personally with hearing loss. And I've learned that about 13% of the US has a disability, and most of the disabilities are invisible. And ta-da, hearing loss is an invisible disability. So Pat, I want to start with, and then I'll shut up and let you talk. I want to start with something that you said, and it stood out to me. And I said this in the converse in the opening. You said you support people with hearing loss, and you also support people working with people with hearing loss. Can you help us understand the distinction? Because you don't need to help me if I don't have a hearing loss. You need to help my colleagues. So how does this work?
Now, I'm so glad that you're focusing on this question because hearing loss is a communication disorder. So you know it affects me. And by the way, people, before we got on, I shouldn't say insisted, I asked for captioning. So whatever Jina is saying, I see it's captioned on below, and that's important for me. But my hearing loss also affects whomever I'm talking to. It's affected this webinar because I needed captions. But if anybody lives with somebody with hearing loss or knows somebody with hearing loss, you know how it affects you. If you live with somebody, they will do one of two things. Either they will advocate for themselves and say, please don't talk to me from another room. Please talk slow, but not too slow. Please don't mumble. Please, what am I forgetting? I might be forgetting some things, but you get the gist. We asked you to do certain things so we can hear you. The other possibility is that we don't acknowledge our hearing loss. And if we don't understand what you're saying, we bluff or pretend we hear you when we don't. What do you?
So there's somebody already asked a question, and it's some of this. I remember when I had COVID the first time, anyway, and I didn't think I'd lost my sense of smell. And I didn't realize that I hadn't lost my sense of smell because it's so gradual. And so somebody's asking, many people have a hearing loss and they don't realize it. And I suspect it's because there's a gradual decline. So can you talk a little bit, you told us that story. I heard that story before. Could you share that? Because you started at 19. How did you get to where we are today?
So that's actually a really great question. It takes, once somebody gets a hearing loss, it takes, the average is 8 years until they realize what's going on. So for myself, nobody in my family has a hearing loss. I didn't know anything about a hearing loss. So when people started to mumble and talk softly, I actually had no idea why. And it took a while till I figured it out. And when I was about 25 or so, I got a hearing test. And I remember the audiologist kept on saying, you can hear me. And I kept on saying, I don't hear you. So, but I don't.
Your audiologist was saying that you should be able to hear them because of the response, or?
No, I think she just didn't suspect I had such a profound hearing loss. And I think one of the things is I probably was a pretty good lip reader. So while we were just talking, I understood what she was saying.
It's funny you say that because, so first of all, somebody said in the Q&A, please look at me when you talk. And that is something that I know is really important. I speak fast and I try now to be very mindful of the speed. I don't always do a good job, but I try. And I feel conspicuous if I'm talking with somebody, particularly somebody who's deaf, and I know they're not hearing me at all. And I feel like I need to do things with my mouth, and it just feels awkward. Don't do that.
No. So
But look,
actually, that's
you said yes. Look at you.
no. So this is like, I always laugh because we actually ask you to talk slower, but not too slow, and do not enunciate because we'll never know what you're talking about.
No.
So no, don't feel self-conscious. Just make sure you don't talk really fast. Just make sure that you talk a little slower, and do not enunciate, because then we'll never know what you're saying.
That's an interesting point that you make. I don't know that I've even thought about it here on video camera. I mean, you and I, we've talked about this, but I remember I met a gentleman. I was introduced to him, and I thought, hey, let's do what I call a Zoom coffee. Let's to get together one-on-one. He asked specifically to use Google Meet. And then I'm like, sure, that's fine. And then he told me that it does a better job of whatever it does.
Captioning.
Not just captioning, but the quality. He said it was easier for him to read lips.
Okay. So
I just think that's interesting, because I share that because the technology tools that are out there are really important. And I think you said to me, different tools for different people for different reasons. Yes? Do you want to talk about that?
So I'm going to go back about Google. What is it? Google Video, whatever it's called. So Google was the first app to automatically put captions. They automatically, and I am assuming everybody knows what captions is. When you watch TV, you might see captions. It's the same thing. So you don't see it on your end, I assume, but everything that Jina is saying, and I am saying, I can see, how do I say it? I can see it in words. I can see it in text. So it's a voice to text app. Zoom, you could get captions, but you had to pay for their subscription. And then people with hearing loss complained, and they changed it. So the free service, they put captions as well.
The other thing I thought was frustrating about Zoom is, if I remember correctly, sorry, Zoom, we're not trying to slam you. It was difficult because I had to know to turn it on so that you could activate it. It was something like that, right?
Yeah, no, that I actually forgot to say that. So with Google, you don't have to turn anything on. It's just there. With Zoom, you have to turn it on in settings, and then the individual person who wants it has to turn it on. But it's the same with Google. Oh, I love this. I love this. So people think of hearing loss as an old people's thing. But the truth is, so first of all, 1 in 5 adults, and adults in this case is defined 18 and over, have hearing loss. Different degrees, some disabling, some just slight, but 1 in 5 people have hearing loss. And by the way, that number is supposed to increase. But what I found shocking when I first found out is 60% of those people with hearing loss are in the workforce. So I know I used to go to SHRM meetings and talk to the HR people, and I would say, let's talk about hearing loss. And they would say, oh no, we don't have anybody with hearing loss in our organization. So I know statistically, unless their statistics are crazy, I know that's wrong. And I know, okay, because I keep on going. Go ahead, what?
No, I'm just doing this so that we get to the pause, because I don't want to interrupt. I just was going to let people know SHRM is the acronym for Society for Human Resource Management. They actually just go by SHRM today, but in case you wanted to look them up, that's how you look them up, SHRM. And to your point, I think, what do we know? 70% of disabilities are invisible. And so statistically, to your point, if there are 100 people in your organization, I'm looking at this, there's a chance that a few of them have hearing loss because they're in the workplace. You'll never know because of what you put here in terms of the challenges you have up here. Bluffing, you talked about that earlier.
Do you mean
There are reasons that you won't know, and it's because I'm covering it up.
people with hearing loss? Can you go to the slide? I don't have it open right now. The slide that says, let's see, where is it? What people with hearing loss are afraid of. It's
Yes.
number 8.
While I do that, Chris, can you go ahead and launch the second polling question, and then we can talk about it, Pat, and then that slide will be on the screen when the poll closes.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Where is your organization on their DEIB journey? Poll question 2. Make your selection now, folks, and this poll is active for 60 seconds.
While that's open, Pat, I'll share a couple of things that came in through the Q&A. Addison shared that his wife is taking, or I should say their wife, I'm assuming gender here, is taking sign language classes, which I think is fantastic.
I'm sorry, it's taking what?
Sign language classes.
Okay.
Let's see, another person said, I have a family member who has hearing loss and is also blind. Oh, wait, that's a question. I'm going to hold it. I'm going to hold it till we get to Q&A. There was one here, great point. Automatic speech recognition, or ASR, created by artificial intelligence is different than communication access real-time translation, or CART. Those types of captions, sometimes we need CART versus ASR. So Christy shared that. I don't know. Oh, I see the poll should probably close here first.
Gotcha. Poll number 2 is closed. Jina, you can share the results if you like.
Oh, no, thanks. I want to keep rolling here. So I don't know if you're familiar with those, but I wanted to share her comment. Okay, so now I have it on the screen. What people with hearing loss want you to know.
So it's actually 8. It's the next one.
Oh, sorry.
So I think one of the reasons that people with hearing loss don't go to HR is because they're scared. They're scared of losing their job, not being promoted, perceived as not being smart, and so they don't ask for accommodations. So I think, how do I say this? I tell you what, let's go to the one before.
This one?
And the one before. And the one before, and the one before. That's perfect. Don't go further. So here, this is what it's like to live with hearing loss. So, I want to go in a million different directions, but let's go to basics. So obviously people with hearing loss mishear. When I first met my partner, he said he was a sailing instructor. I thought he said he was a singing instructor. I said, oh, it's so lovely to sing. Could you sing something for me? His face was very interesting.
I have to put this up here while you're saying that. This one, just so you all know, this cartoon, this completely reminds me of what you're saying.
That's right. Thank you. That's perfect that you put it up there. But just think, if you were in a workplace and an employee misunderstood what you said and did a comparable thing, instead of saying, now I can't remember, St. George and the wagon, they gave you St. George and the dragon. Oh, Zena, put the one about the waitress. It's so funny.
The which one? This one?
The one about the waitress. Just look at this. It's so funny. Waitress, can I ask you something about the menu, please? The menu, please, are none of your damn business. So we're laughing about it, but this is what can happen in the workplace unless hearing loss is out in the open. Okay, go back to the...
You want to go back to the challenges slide?
6, yeah.
Well, I think this is important, is most of us, when you start giving examples like that, I think we all know what it feels like to be in a situation where you didn't hear what somebody was saying, not because you have a hearing loss, but distraction, there was some other sound that made it difficult. You were on mute in a Zoom, and so you think you're talking and I can't hear you. I think if we all stop and pause with those moments, we can start to understand it's one thing for it to happen to me occasionally. It's another thing for you to have to struggle with this all the time. And I say struggle not to disrespect or dismiss, but to acknowledge that if I'm not mindful and thoughtful, considerate, aware, all of those things, I can't be doing things to support you. Like I wouldn't know that I should be looking at you when I'm talking. Even if we're in a conference room and you're sitting over here, I should turn and look at you when I'm talking if I know you have a hearing loss. Because I don't know to do that, I'm going to struggle. You're going to have a struggle that you don't need to have. That's what I mean by struggle. Does that make sense?
No, that's why having hearing loss out in the open eliminates, I mean, everybody's going to misunderstand things from time to time for different reasons. But if hearing loss is out in the open, then it's eliminated. I shouldn't say it's eliminated, but the possibility of miscommunication is cut down 1,000,000,000%. I took that statistic. It's 1,000,000,000%.
Oh, 1,000,000,000%. And how many numbers is that behind the percent? Anyway.
Don't ask me.
Yeah, we don't know. I think that's important though, because this whole hearing loss, until I saw the presentation that you did over the summer, that really inspired me to say, please join me on this conversation. This completely falls into the, I don't know what I don't know. And I also have learned that what I thought I knew, I didn't know. And so for example, I'm so transparent. Anybody who's seen these webinars before have probably heard me talk about the fact that I have epilepsy. It is an invisible disability. It is under control with medication. There is a 0.0001% chance somebody will have to worry about that happening when I'm around them. I thought I knew what epilepsy was because I'd seen it on television. I'd heard about it in the news, perhaps. And then when I got the diagnosis, I realized that I didn't know anything about it. And I think that this category, hearing loss, might fall into that. Because maybe there's a myth that either you can or you can't hear. It's one or the other. Like I don't think about somebody who has diminished hearing. Like, I don't know what that feels like. I don't know how to support that. Does that make sense?
You know, why don't you show slide number 16?
16, this one?
So this is sort of a visual representation of what a person with hearing loss might hear. Now, exactly what this visual representation would be depends exactly with their hearing loss, where it is. Like before I got my cochlear implants, I heard much less than that. I could barely communicate. But this gives you an idea of what a person with hearing loss is hearing. So this really gives you an idea that we'll miss a lot. But it also shows you why it is so exhausting for people with hearing loss to hear. So we have to fill in the blanks of what we don't hear. And so people with hearing loss will actually talk about what they call auditory fatigue. And that is after doing a lot of talking, or I should say listening, we get exhausted because we're busy filling in the words that we haven't heard. So I am going to get milk. So I have to figure out that is store. I mean, in that case, it's pretty basic. But the other thing is you're lip reading. You're looking at their visual representation. So if I can't hear what somebody is saying, And I'm sick and tired of asking them to repeat because they still are mumbling. If they look happy, I will smile. If they look sad, I'll look sad. I'll mimic their visual representation. And this goes back to one of the things that I put before, is if people with hearing loss are not out in the open, if they're not out in the closet, if they don't feel comfortable in their organization saying that they have a hearing loss, they will bluff. That means pretend that they understand when they don't, which is a really bad thing because A, they're not really sure what they're agreeing to, and they might be agreeing to something that well, you get what I'm saying.
They would have never agreed to that if they understood completely.
Exactly.
I want to share something, everyone. I'm going to push this out to the chat. It came in through the Q&A, but I pushed this out with full disclosure that it hasn't been vetted. But Pat, I don't know if you've heard about this. Starkey.com has a hearing loss simulator. So I just thank you for sharing that link. I wanted to, in case anybody was interested.
So I haven't heard of.
We can start to understand this through a number of different tools.
I'm so glad that you show that. I'm not familiar with that particular tool, but I want to tell you, if you've got a hearing loss, this is the time to have it. It's really the time to have it. You know,
you say that because the tools and the technology, right? Because that sounds horrible, but I know what you mean. Because the resources available today weren't even available, what, 5 years ago?
So I don't have hearing aids, but hearing aids in the last 5 years have improved dramatically. But it was only, I always forget, I think it's about 35, 40 years ago that cochlear implants were a thing that you could get. And for people who don't know what a cochlear implant is, it's a surgical procedure that replaces, it's called the hair cells in your inner ear. And because of that, the nerve endings in your brain get the stimulus electrically. So I am actually bionic. So I have electrodes in my inner ear. It's just so exciting and so fascinating. And I just can't even imagine that somebody even thought of the idea. Yeah. But I hear electronically. I don't hear auditory. What is the word? Not electronically.
Organically? I don't know.
No, there's another word, but you get the gist. Well, it's okay.
Let's do this. I actually want to open another poll because we have to make sure we're pacing these polls along. I want to launch this poll. Is sign language considered a language? So, Chris, if you can open that one up. There's another conversation. So yeah, folks, I see that it is open. And I'll say on Chris's behalf, it'll be open for about a minute.
Thank you.
I've been doing these for too long. There are some questions that have come in, Pat, about sign language, and that's why I wanted to put this up here so we could talk about it.
Perfect.
But I only wanted people to see, I wanted to know what they know first.
I love talking about this because it's sign language is very important. And we'll talk about the difference between deaf, small d, and a capital D.
Yeah, actually, that's a good one. I'll put that slide up for when we come back.
Okay.
One of the comments in here, somebody was asking, is there a way to take ASL classes for CPE? And that's American Sign Language is what that stands for. I will tell you the answer to that depends entirely on the provider. Some providers will, in fact, have a sign language interpreter there, and I do think you need to ask for that accommodation. Pat, can we put that on the list of things to talk about later?
Sure.
Jina, I'll close out this poll for you folks in 3, 2, and 1. Closing out poll number 3 of 5. Back over to you.
And the results, Pat, 84% said yes, it's a language, and 14% said they weren't sure. And what's the answer? Ta-da!
Oh, it's definitely a language. So I'm going to divert, but go back to sign language. there's a difference between deaf with a capital D and a small d. Capital D refers to a culture where sign language is the language, and they don't consider the fact, they consider the fact that this is their language and they are not handicapped in a way. In fact, maybe we're handicapped because we don't know their language. And sign language, you know, if you're in a noisy room and you can't hear, people who use sign language have no problem. And small d refers to anybody with a hearing loss, different degrees, it doesn't matter. So the deaf community is so brilliant. First of all, it's under 3% of of the deaf community, small d, knows sign language.
Wait, say that again.
I didn't say that right, did I?
I just
Less than 3% of the deaf community knows sign language. So the deaf population, the capital D, they are the best advocators. They have a lot to do with the American Disabilities Act. They were very instrumental in getting the American Disabilities Act. The small d, the hearing loss community, had very little to do with it. The hearing loss community are not great advocators. They are great under the carpet. They are great at not letting know people that have a hearing loss. So the deaf community is really the active, the proactive community, and they believe that sign language is the way to go. Interestingly enough, I know a lot of people with hearing that are studying sign language. It's very beautiful. It's a beautiful language, and you can say things with sign language that you can't really say in spoken language. It is a fully developed language, and it does not use the same syntax as spoken English. It uses a different syntax. And here's a bit of trivia that you're not asking. Just as speech or language is different in different countries and even different parts of a country, like East Coast versus West Coast, there's slightly different words. It's the same with sign language.
No, it's funny. I'm not surprised at all. And while we're on sign language, because I know we're going to give this away anyway, so let's just go ahead and do the next polling question, which is the percentage of hearing loss population that uses ASL. I think we already checked.
I just gave the answer.
Well, fine. People will get their CPE because you gave it away.
Okay, go for it.
That's cheating.
We'll take it. Poll 4 is active, folks.
And somebody asked the difference between AI and CART, and I definitely would like to talk about that.
A couple things I'll share real quick while the poll is open. It says babies can learn sign language before they use spoken language. And thank you, Tessa, for sharing that. I learned that very early with my first son, and as a result, we experimented with that. These little babies are brilliant. They just don't have the verbal vocabulary to share it with you. Somebody said, I hear that catching hearing loss early can help offset dementia. That's an interesting comment. I don't know that we can.
What did you say? If you catch it early, you can what?
I'm sorry, I closed it off of my screen. I can't see it. But I will tell you this, Pat. Somebody is saying, is that a Christmas cactus? So they're looking at the background.
I'll close this out for you as well. Okay. Closing out poll 4 or 5, folks. And Jina, you can discuss the results if you'd like.
Shockingly, Pat, almost everybody got it right. Because you kind of gave away the answer. So, sorry. I should.
Brilliant.
They're brilliant. They didn't hear the answer. They're brilliant. So what was it that you wanted to talk about? I did not write that down. I apologize.
Somebody asked or talked about the difference between automatic speech recognition, or AI, and CART. And that's a really important thing. So automatic speech recognition is funneled through AI, and that's what we're using right now. It's it's the AI doing it. And I should say that it has improved so dramatically in the last few years. Before, 5 years ago, we used to just laugh at what the captions would say. CART, on the other hand, is a person who is is giving the caption. Say it again. Transcribing. You know, a court reporter uses that kind of thing. A CART provider uses the same thing. And a CART reporter will say, Pat, and talking, blah, blah, blah. Or whoever is talking, it will say who's talking. So it's a lot better. CART providers have saved people with hearing loss for years. I would say that automatic speech recognition is slowly going to take the place of CART providers. Never, I doubt it will ever be 100%, but I know for our hearing loss meetings, we always used to use a CART provider. We don't anymore. We use Zoom and we use their AI captions because they're pretty good.
Well, let me invite all of our participants. If you haven't downloaded the slides, please do, because there is a lot of information on the slides. A lot of it is stuff we don't need to speak to. It's really there as a resource for you. And I'm saying that, Pat, because I am getting more questions than I've ever seen coming through on any of these webinars. And I would love, if we can, to shift to jumping right into knocking out as many of these questions as we can, because they're really great. They might prompt something that you might want to comment on.
Sure. Go for it.
This one is just a comment that somebody made, that their 4-year-old with Down syndrome, their 4-year-old Down syndrome grandson knows some sign language from special education classes and is not yet verbal. And I share that because that's an example of why sign language can be so beneficial. This isn't just for people who struggle with hearing loss or are profoundly deaf. And we all do it. I mean, we all know this sign, right? Or this sign.
But there's another thing, and that is parents of infants, babies, toddlers are, before they're verbal, I guess is what I'm saying, are teaching their children sign language, very basic sign language, because they can communicate. I want more food, as opposed to I want more food, I want more food. It's so much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Except we taught our son that this means ceiling fan. And so he kept doing this constantly. And I'm like, no, dude, I'm not going to keep turning it on. It was very cute. When someone wears a hearing aid, how much can he or she or they actually hear? I'm asking because I'd like to be mindful of how I speak in front of them.
Oh, I'm so happy you asked that question. So it varies depending on the hearing loss, the fitting of the hearing aids. It depends on a million things. But the real point is hearing aids, cochlear implants, anything does not bring you back to normal hearing. One of the things I say in the slides is it's best to ask the person with hearing loss exactly what would help them the most. And I'm going to give you a little cadoozle, and that is what helps them the most might change from one day to the next. So, for example, if I'm tired, I need more. If I've just had a fight with my partner, of course, we never have fights. If I have a fight and have something on my mind, my concentration isn't as good.
I think we can all relate to that in so many ways. So let's see some other questions, so many of them. I don't know if we're going to get to them. With hearing loss, the person needs to be looking at me and I'm trying to match what I hear in the lip movement and the topic of the circumstance. So that's just somebody sharing their experience. Thank you. Thank you, Brian, for that. I have a family member who has hearing loss and is also blind. I'd love to hear if you have any feedback when hearing loss is combined with another obstacle. That's from George.
So I don't know if you can hear me. If you have a hearing loss where you communicate with sign language, there's this kind of sign language. But if you're deaf and blind, they sign in the hand. And I honestly don't know how it's done, but they do it in the hand. It's an amazing thing.
Yeah. So in other words, there are probably strategies for that, and it's a matter of reaching out. There are associations, and I'm sorry now that I probably should have found some and put them into the slides, but that I know there are a number of associations that can help provide resources and education and tools related to hearing loss. Is there one that jumps out at you, Pat, that you know of?
So I'm going to say two. Hearing Loss Association of America is the largest nonprofit advocacy group. Is this just a US group or is this an international group?
People internationally, anybody around the world can be joining us.
So there's an international support group, which is an online, and it's called saywhatclub.org. So say what? What did you say? It's called saywhatclub.org. And that's a wonderful organization. It's only online, and they meet for conventions once a year. It's very active. They also have a Facebook group. Again, Say What Club.
Someone was asking if sign language is taught in schools. Do you know if that's the case?
I have no idea. I bet it is in some schools and not in others. I think, like schools vary on what languages they teach.
That's interesting. I know when I was an undergrad, I took a sign language class, and I learned so much from that class. And my final exam was I had to pick a song, and I had to be able to sign the song as it played. So it was really fascinating. And I'm in the Washington, D.C. area, and I had an opportunity to visit Gallaudet University, which is a school for the deaf. If anybody's in this area and has an opportunity, you could go there and tour it. It is a beautiful facility, and it really opens the eyes, no pun intended, about the different environment. When the environment supports people who have hearing loss or are deaf, you realize that it supports us as well. That phrase, what is it? A rising tide lifts all ships.
Things that people with hearing loss ask for really benefit many people. Like if I go to a college graduation and there's a speaker, I won't be able to hear them. So if I ask for captions ahead of time, they'll provide the captions. But if I do that, many people benefit from it. It's not just me.
It's funny you say that. I was actually going to say this earlier, and I'm glad you brought it up. And I wish we had a raise hand function, but we don't. I watch television 100% of the time using closed captioning. And I've actually turned down the volume to read the closed captioning if I can't understand what they're saying, because the sound of the television can make it harder to read, which to me is an experience that's close to what you're saying about being distracted. But I can't look at the show and read the subtitles and be listening all at the same time. Sometimes it's overload. That's what I mean. But I turn them on all the time. And I think it was you that shared this tip. And if not, I'm going to credit you with it. That you can open your phone, open the Notes app, turn on the speaker, and then the speaker will do the transcription for you. So if anybody's ever in a situation where they don't have a voice to text option, that might be a cheat. Was that you that shared that idea? And
I'll just share an app that makes it it's a free app unless you use it over a certain amount. It's Otter, OTTER.ai.
Mm-hmm.
OTTER.ai.
I had a guest on the show back in April or May. We were talking about neurodiversity. And I don't know the name of the company, but they support a number of apps that help with like text, speech to text. The same might also be in reverse text to speech, because if somebody has a hearing loss, they might not feel comfortable verbally speaking. So there are a number of tools that are out there. The technology, and this is what you were saying, but it's the good time to have hearing loss. That's what you meant by that?
I am so grateful. you know, people with hearing loss in the Bible were considered throwaways. Aristotle and Plato considered people with hearing loss throwaways. I have a picture of a woman with hearing loss before there were hearing aids, and she's like half dead because she can't participate. Hearing loss is so bizarre. People ask me, what would you rather have, be blind or have a hearing loss? Well, frankly, I would rather not have either. But this is from Helen Keller, who had both. If you're blind, you lose things. If you're deaf, you lose people. And people is really what makes us human. So hearing loss, you may not consider it a big deal. But if we lose our connection with people, we get isolated, we get depressed. And somebody said something about dementia. There is strong evidence that hearing loss can cause dementia. And if you think about it, it's not surprising. If you have no idea what's going on, you tune out, you get further and further back until you don't exist.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not the total cause, but it's definitely something.
Before we wrap up, can I ask you, I'm going to put this picture up here. I actually asked you to put this in the slides and in the presentation, and if you could share your story, because it came up when we were just chatting, and I just thought, there's an emotional connection that we have to so many things around us, and the arts play such an important part in our lives. And why would a piano mean something to you, Pat, if you have hearing loss? It was a beautiful story. Can you share that with everyone?
Sure. So I have been playing the piano since I'm 3 years old. My sister needed somebody to play chopsticks with her, so I learned chopsticks. I learned to play the piano when I was 3 years old. But my point is, playing the piano has been with me. I was a piano major in college. It's always been a part of my life. But as my hearing declined, it sounded worse and worse. And when I got my cochlear implant, I could not recognize melodies that I knew. So I could not recognize Happy Birthday. So just as an aside, cochlear implants are meant to help you with speech, but it is not quite there yet with music. So I got my cochlear implants about 10 years ago. And today I can hear melodies. I can only hear the melodies of music that I'm familiar with. So why do we have the picture of my piano? When I moved to an island in Maine, I didn't bring my piano because I didn't think I could play anymore. I didn't think I could hear. But just about a month ago, I just brought my piano back up, and this is where it is, right in my home. And I start to play again, and I can't tell you, I don't know what the words are for my happiness and my joy to be able to hear, understand the melodies that I've been playing. Yeah. And I haven't played in a long time, so I'm playing simple things, but that's okay. It's just a
Sorry
second.
about that. She's gonna go quiet. Look, while she's doing that, which is funny, while she's doing that, I'll just let everybody know 2 weeks from now, Drew All is going to be joining me. He was here back in June, and he's going to be helping us understand how to talk more comfortably and confidently about gender, because that is one of the areas for many people that they're afraid to talk about it at all. So we don't want to misrepresent, don't want to offend, we certainly don't want to be stupid. So that one is something I would recommend. I hope you can join us in 2 weeks. Pat, I will tell you that just now as you were telling that story, I started to get like misty-eyed because music is something that's been part of my life forever, and I cannot imagine losing it. And so the fact that the reason I wanted you to share that story is that the joy that I have felt for you when you said you could hear it again. See, I don't want to cry, but I do it often. It's just that important. And
It's crazy what
little things
music
like
is.
that are the things that fill your heart.
Thank you.
Let me see, is there anything else people are sharing? Because we have about 2 minutes left. My big brother has a deaf person, it says on this year. I'm not sure what that means. It has been interesting to hear his frustration with others. Mumbling is a big one. My husband has diminished hearing for about 15 years now. He copes because he's very good at reading lips. He's always been amazed at how work team members mumble, talk to the paper on their desk. So I'm getting to talk like this, or turn to the side while he's having a conversation. And he's had to tell people to look at him when they talk. So this is helpful for those of us who aren't sure. Just look at somebody when you're talking to them. Hearing loss at work is hard. Many people think you're a nuisance to ask to have repeated and assume that you don't know anything about it. Hearing aids are not like glasses. They just help. There is a loss. In other words, glasses supplement something, but there is a loss that hearing aids support. So that's another point. Trying to see really quickly, what else can I go into? Somebody said at their high school, hearing, it counted, I think it was sign language counted as a foreign language. That's an interesting one. Somebody took ASL and it was a requirement for their high school graduation.
Oh, interesting.
Brad shares, I think that especially the pandemic, we have to realize that everyone, in all caps, is dealing with their own levels of mental disorder, and we have to be aware and more respectful of for those people. As you say, 70% are invisible. And then Brad goes on to list a number of things that are like neurodiversity or people with autoimmune diseases or challenges, visual aids, hearing aids, technology supports. The fact that all of this has become more visible, I think is a benefit of what we've been going through in recent times, and hopefully can come to appreciate it. Somebody said, Pat, what a joyful moment for you and your dog. And they said, did your dog react because they could feel we were getting emotional? Dogs are so smart. Right, Pat, so
I'm going to
with that, you know what? Here's that. I'm going to toss it to you to give us a final word before I start our we have a couple of other things to do to wrap up. Final thoughts?
just in your organization, make an environment for people to be comfortable to talk about hearing loss. I'm happy to give presentations. I'm happy to talk about it in your organization. Jina, you will give them my contact information.
So in the handouts, all of our
Okay.
contact information is there. We both have a slide with our bio on there and our contact information.
Good. So just as long as you have an environment where hearing loss is acknowledged and have people feel comfortable talking about it, once it's out in the open, it's not a big deal. It just needs to be out in the open.
It's amazing that when we know something, we can do something about it, right? It's the hidden stuff that's difficult.
That's totally right. That's totally right.
So as we wrap up, a couple of things, one last thing, and then we'll open the polling slide. But before we open that last poll, I just wanted to let everybody know, in addition to the webinar coming up with Drew in 2 weeks. I'm doing my annual year in review, the final one for the 2023 season. So technically it's a one-on-one, but I'm going to be sharing a recap of so many things. If you would like, you can put in your question in advance for me to answer. Go to the registration page for that webinar. It is now open, and at the bottom of the page, there's a link to submit a question in advance. And with that, Chris, maybe we can launch that last polling question as we wrap up.
I sure can, folks. Poll number 505 is now active. What would you like to do as a follow-up to today's program? Make your choices now, folks. And as always, this poll is active for 60 seconds.
Pat, I just want to thank you for joining me. And it takes bravery to talk about something that carries such stigma. And we know that there are certain disabilities that we don't understand, so we tend to dismiss them. And that dismissal is what makes it difficult to bring it up at work. So I think you've helped
You got it.
open some eyes. So thank you for that.
It is my pleasure, and I'm so glad you let me do it.
Oh, this isn't the let. I asked, and you were so graceful to join me. That I appreciate so much. Well, folks, I hope this has been helpful to you. I can see a lot of people say they're just here for the CPE, but one of the options are resources. And so if you say you're more interested in resources, I'll be sure to follow up to see if there's a way that we can help you. And maybe, Pat, you and I can put our heads together to even come up with like a simple handout that might have some links and some recommendations, either books or podcasts or something like that. Maybe we can put something together.
Sure.
Great. Well, thank you for joining me. That wraps up today's program. Chris, back to you to close us out.